So that's why we call for epistemic self-centering, actual decolonization. Self-centering is really crucial. See, in South Africa, the descendants of the Dutch in South Africa, they went to Africa, and you know what they called themselves? Afrikaan. And they forced the indigenous Africans to call them Afrikaans. But the indigenous Africans were called black. And instead of saying we are the indigenous, we will decide what we are called in our land, they say, yes, sir, we are black people. We're colored. This is what is called, that's self-centering. So one of the things I don't understand, instead of calling themselves black, why didn't they look for a collective name within African languages? Or they just call themselves Africans. But no, we have to do what Europeans tell us to do. We call ourselves black. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first video of the series of videos I'll be making based on my scholarly works. So this one will be based on the first chapter, which is name and reference. But for this video, I'll focus on the name Negro. So this was a controversy that was going on between the beginning of the 19th century until the middle of the 20th century, so 1960s. So that's the topic I'll be talking about in this video. So my name is Dr. Kuir Garang. So these are the topics I'll be covering. The name Negro, the letter, this young man, he was a high schooler in South Bend, Indiana. His name was Roland Barton. And then the response by Du Bois, and I'll talk shortly about who Du Bois is, and then Blackness as an imposed identity today. What are some of the problems related to the use of color-based identities? And then what I call abdication of epistemic and epistemological responsibility. So Roland wrote a letter to the Crisis in 1928. The Crisis was the official publication, and I think it's still the official publication of NAACP. And NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It was formed in February 1909, and it's a civil rights organization. It fought for the civil rights and social justice in the U.S. from 1909 to the present. So one of the things Barton said was he was objecting to the use of Negro for Africans, which I call continental Africans. He also was objecting to the use of the term Negro for African Americans, but the reasons are different. So he said the name Negro was invented by white people to denigrate us. So that's one of the reasons he was objecting. Why do you use a name that was invented to denigrate our people? So he was suggesting that for Africans, the Crisis and African Americans or people of African descent should use either African or Native instead of the term Negro. For African Americans, he was suggesting that they use the inclusive term American, because many Americans at the time believed that the use of the term Negro or any other subnational identities were the reason why African Americans were not seen as American. So he was just saying, why just not call us American? Because calling us Negroes or colored or people of color or any other name will segregate us. So he also said that the name Negro will not be in use by the time he becomes a man. So by the time he becomes an adult, he believed that the name Negro will not be operational. And I think he was somehow prophetic, because by the 1960s, 1970s, no one was using Negro anymore. But I always say that maybe it's not because he was prophetic in a way, but young people are always the engine of change. They are the ones who are not really invested in the social structures that are existing. They are the people to see problems within the social culture, social structures within the culture. Adults become inured to the cultural ideals, to the social structures that they don't really see the problems within the cultures. So that's why it's always the young people in the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution, mostly young people. Even today, the people who are pushing for change are mostly young people. So the way he said it may be seen as prophetic. It was prophetic in a way, but it's usually how young people think. They usually see something they don't like, and then they work towards it change. Now, here's one of the things he said. The most piercing thing that hurts me in this February crisis which forced me to write was the notice that called the natives of Africa Negroes instead of calling them Africans or natives. The word Negro or nigger is a white man's word to make us feel inferior. But before I go to the response of Du Bois, I want to talk about William Whipper. And William Whipper was an abolitionist. He was also an Americanist. That seems also to be the attitude of Barton, because Barton is saying, do not segregate us as Negroes, just call us American. So Whipper had the same idea, but he was also against any other name. He was against the use of African. He was against the use of colored or people of color or any variation like mulatto and things like that. He just wanted all Americans to be Americans. Now, it's almost the same thing this young man, Button, was gravitating towards. Now, here's what he says. And we call on our brethren throughout the country, if they desire to make a successful appeal for the abolition of complexional distinctions, to first throw up the African charters. Tear down your complexional barriers and cast them from you, for they are wicked and heinous. Open your churches and schools to all that bring forth the requisite qualifications, and you will make an important step that will place you far in the advance of your persecutors. Now, when he talks about African charters, is this. Many African Americans, between even going back to the 18th century until the middle of the 19th century, 1850s, 60s, they used to name their institutions African. African school of this, African church of this, African this. We still have some institutions that are still called African. Even in Canada, they use the term African. They were not using African American or Afro American. They actually used the term African. Many Americans, they were proud of the European tradition. Even if they made fun of African traditions, they still embraced the African side. Not all of them embraced it, but they wanted to distinguish themselves as proud people. So they named the institutions African. In the dissertation, I give some examples of the names they used. Now, but there was a problem. When many abolitionists between the 1800 and the 1850s, that was the time when abolitionism was scaled up. But there was a problem in America. There was this assumption that the racial gap between Europeans and Africans is so wide. So if you were to free the slaves en masse in America, there will be race war and they will massacre themselves. The Africans would want to retaliate because of the brutality of slavery. So going back to Thomas Jefferson, one of the things he said is these people are so different. So there's no way they can live together in the same country. They will murder themselves. They will kill. So even if he owned slaves, but he was a liberal, he had these Enlightenment ideas. So he's saying, okay, these people are inferior, but we shouldn't treat them like animals. So if we free them, yes, we can free them, but we're not keeping them in America. We free them, we send them back to Africa or another colony. Britain had already created Sierra Leone. So the American, thought of the same thing. They said, we either let them go to Haiti or go to South America somewhere, or not just in America. They can be free, but not here. So, and then there were people who wanted to make that happen. So they formed the American Colonization Society. And that was meant to move some people to Liberia. Because the Brits had formed their own colony where they were sending the Africans, they were sending the poor whites also, not just Africans, they were also sending poor whites to Sierra Leone. So they formed Liberia, and the American Colonization Society was there raising funds, going to African American institutions and to gathering and telling them, okay, this is what is happening. They don't like you here. So, and we don't like race war. We don't like people to massacre themselves. So here's a solution. Go to Africa. Some did, but some said, nope, this is our land. We were born here, we'll die here. Yes, we are Africans. We are descendants of African slaves, but this is the land of our nativity. We were born here. We are as American as any American is. So, but then there was a problem. The racists were saying, if you call yourself African, if you name your institutions African, then why can you go to Africa? So many Americans started to say, okay, this is going to be a problem for us. We're not going to say we name our institutions African and we don't want to go to Africa. That's a problem. So some of them said, we have to remove the names. So that's why he said, remove your African charters. And many did. They started to remove the names so that they become Americans. Because if you're African, then go to Africa. But if you want to be an American, then why do you call yourself African? So they started to remove the names. That's what he's saying. He wants them to just be American. Not Africans, not Afro-Americans, not colored, nothing, just American. That's what Barton was saying. So the point is, Barton was wading into a controversy that was more than 100 years old. It wasn't new. And between 1900 and the 1960s, that conversation came back. 1900 to the 1920s, then you have the era of Marcus Garvey, UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. It was the age of the Harlem Renaissance, of the new Negro that wasn't going to be subservient, because the old Negro European Americans were used to is the one who says yes sir, yes ma'am to everything, even insults. They say yes sir to almost everything. So the new Negro was saying, nope, we're not going to say that. So there was a resurgence of African Americans speaking, defying the status quo. Ronald was part of it. Now, let's come to the great W.E.B. Du Bois. I call him great because if you read his books, if you read all the opinion articles in the crisis, it's amazing. He was actually hated by the CIA. The FBI had a document on him. He was actually denied passport once when he became affiliated with the Soviet Union. So he was the editor of the crisis, and he responded to Barton it was lengthy. These are some of his books. This is one of his well-known books, The Souls of Black Folk. There's Black Reconstruction, there's Dark Water, there's John Brown, and then there's other. There's Africa in the World. There's so many of them. And then there's the Philadelphia Negro. So if you can, most of them are free online in PDF, so you can find them. So if you haven't, please read this, The Souls of Black Folk. Very simple to read, very creatively written, but very historically informed. It tells you what happened to African Americans after the end of slavery, but it was very objective in his analysis. Now, what did he say? This is a response to the young Barton. He said that Barton was conflating what a thing is called and what a thing is. For example, my name is Kuir, and Kuir identifies an object and a human being called a human being. So the name Kuir is only a name. I can decide today to change the name and call myself Adur or Garang or a Jack or Ding. But the person who is Kuir, the way I look, the way I behave, the way I talk, everything else will remain the same. So he's saying change the name Negro wouldn't change African American. It wouldn't remove racism. So racism will continue to exist. They didn't call it racism at the time. They call it, I think, racial prejudice or just prejudice or outrage. Race as a term existed, but it was used loosely in the 19th, 20th century because there was English race, there was German race, the French race, and Irish race. So it was used loosely. It wasn't used to collectivize Europeans or Africans. So race existed, but racism didn't. It is something that they didn't use it. It's something that came later on. So he said African Americans will continue to be disrespected even if you change the name. So it wouldn't make European Americans respect African Americans just because you've changed their names. He also says that identity names have questionable histories. So it's not just the term Negro, it's just almost anyone. And I'll read a quote where he actually outlines that comprehensively. So he also said Barton was ashamed of his own people, that he was ashamed of being descended from Black people, Africans. And maybe that's why he was saying that the name, the term Negro and Black and Nigger were invented to make us feel inferior. So he took that to be Barton saying, being called Negro makes us feel inferior. Well, that's not what he said, but that's what he was saying. So Barton was ashamed of his people. So when he says, let us change the name, he was presupposing that he was ashamed of his people. Now, this is what he said. Do not at the outset of your career make the all too common error of mistaking names for things. Names are only conventional signs for identifying things. Things are the reality that counts. If a thing is despised, either because of ignorance or because it's despicable, you will not alter matters by changing its name. If men despise Negroes, they will not despise them less if Negroes are called colored or Afro-Americans. There's some things with which we can disagree and things with which we can agree. Here are the things we can agree with. Du Bois is right that we shouldn't conflate what a thing is and what a thing is called, because names are just signs, conventional signs that help us identify things. We can always change them. So it would be a mistake to conflate the two. Names also, as he said, are just signs for identifying things. So they help us pick out things. So they make things identifiable. They help us in terms of communication. As I said earlier, if I change my name to Lual without telling other people that I've changed my name, and I tell a few people, and you meet some of the people who knew me when I grew up and tell them I'm looking for Lual Garang, they'll probably show you my brother, even if you did not mean my brother, you meant me. Until you tell people that this is the name of the new name and everyone knows. So when you go to my family and say I'm looking for Lual, they will tell you which Lual, because they want to be specific. So names help us communicate and identify objects that we are communicating about. Without names will be lost, will be really, really lost. So, and as he mentioned, that changing a name of a thing doesn't change how people feel about that thing. If I change my name, it wouldn't change how people feel about me. Some people will continue to hate me. People who like me will continue to like me. So name doesn't really change how other people feel about that given entity. So if you were to change the name of African Americans, at the time they were called Negroes. So Negroes, if you change the name and say the Afro Americans or Africans, then it would have not changed the mindset of European Americans at the time in the 1920s. If they wanted to lynch them, they would still lynch them. If they wanted to segregate them, they would still segregate them. So we can agree with those things. But there are also things with which we can disagree. For example, changing your social names, social identity names, should not depend on what other people feel, especially your oppressor, what they feel or think. Whether you change the name or you don't, the oppressor is going to feel the same way. So if you say, okay, let us not waste our time changing our names, because this dominant social group, the people with power, will not even entertain that. That's not how you should change the name. Right? There's something we call now decolonization or self-centering. You change things because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what your values say. That's what your history is supposed to say. That's what your ancestors are supposed to say. Or that's what your ancestors are. But if you say, okay, I'll wait until the oppressor is okay with this, and then I'll change my name, then you're putting the well-being, your emotional well-being, your cultural well-being in the hand of the very people who don't really care about what happens to you. So changing identity names, it's about epistemological, and social control over your culture and your social life. You don't change things because of what other people think. You change things because you want to control the narrative about your identity. So when I say epistemic, I'm talking about knowledge. So what is the knowledge reservoir from which you choose to make decisions, to relate to other people? So epistemic authority is about the knowledge that is used to make decisions. So if you have some authority about the knowledge that you use, if you say, I'm not going to be called black because of A, B, C, D, what knowledge are you going to use? Are you using a knowledge that was produced by someone else, a knowledge base that is denigrating to you? Or are you saying, well, this is what the existing knowledge is saying, so we cannot change anything? When I talk about epistemological, it's about knowledge production. Philosophers tend to say epistemology is a theory of knowledge. Doesn't tell you much. So when a scientist produces some knowledge or makes some discovery, there's always a process, which many of you know is called a method, that they use. What tools did they use? So method, for those of you who may not know, are the tools that are used. So if you read in a paper, you'll always see a section that is called method. It outlines what was done, the processes, whether it was in the lab, whether it was an observation, or whatever it was. If your method is not clear, then your results are going to be questioned. And your method also has to be replicable. It should be replicated by other scientists. Otherwise, if you're the only one who knows how to do it and you cannot explain it clearly, then this is going to be questionable, and your paper may not be published by a journal. So what I call epistemological authority is having control over how knowledge is produced, over when you come to a conclusion that such a thing is the fact, or such a thing is the truth, then the knowledge pool that is helping you come to that conclusion, or the knowledge production process that allows you to produce the knowledge that leads you to that conclusion, should be something within your control. If you can say today, we shouldn't use black, and then you go to history and say, this is what I'm saying, then you have control over your cultures, your social values. But if you say, no, we're not going to do that because the dominant group are not going to accept it, then you don't have control over your knowledge production, over episteme. So if you say that, let us not change this because they will not accept it, then you are abdicating your epistemological and epistemic power. So this is an epistemic and epistemological abdication. And as I will show through Gates, is to give the impression that someone else from the dominant group is going to come to us and say, okay, we used to call you black, we used to call you Negro, we used to call you colored, today we call you this. Okay, we accept. If you say you're not black, we're going to accept it. And then now, that's when we can change. That's terrible. That's an abdication of this epistemic and epistemological responsibility. And people like Du Bois were very influential, but they were invested in the standards of the day, in the morals of the day, and that's why they resisted the change of the Negro. They were invested in it. For those of you who have read the Structure of Scientific Revolution by Thomas Kuhn, one of the things he said is scientists do not change necessarily because there's a new discovery that disproves their theory. And we talk about scientific theories are not the same as theory in everyday life. So when they say scientific theory, it's backed up by evidence. So please do not confuse scientific theory with when you tell someone that's a theory. No, scientific theories have strong evidence supporting them. Like theory of evolution, it has evidence. So Kuhn said that there are many scientists that when the new discoveries come up, new discoveries saying, okay, your theory is wrong because here's new evidence. They didn't say, some would say now, but they said, some of them didn't say, yeah, okay, I'll abandon my theory. Some didn't. The only time their theories lost currency in the scientific community is when they died. So if you haven't read the Structure of Scientific Revolution, please read it. Thomas Kuhn. So because epistemic authorities, scientists who see themselves as authorities in the field, and if you write a paper now, a scholarly paper for a journal, and you don't cite people who are known in the field, they will question whether you actually know what you're talking about. So they look for the authorities in the field. Did you cite them? If you didn't, they will say, okay, you didn't read well. So these are people who are respected. It takes time for them to abandon what they believe. And it's even worse in humanities and social science. So Du Bois was one of the people who was invested in Negro because that was what many people believe, especially people who are highly educated. Now, I want to emphasize this using the quote from Henry Louis Gates. Some of you know him from Finding Your Roots, from other documentaries on PBS. The quote is from this book, 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Man. He interviewed different influential African Americans like late Colin Powell, Louis Farrakhan, Belafonte, and the rest. Very prominent musicians and artists and politicians. So some of them would say, look, I'm not black. I'm not a black writer. I'm just a writer. I'm not a black president. I'm just the president. But he said, well, that's, given the realities of North America, you cannot just choose to say I'm not black. Because black is imposed on us. You cannot just choose to refuse it. He said no. So this is why he said, hence, the appeal of that comforting old lie. I'm not a black ex, poet, president, or whatever. I'm an ex who happens to be black. Alas, circumstance wouldn't have it so. Nobody happens to be black. That's a definitional truth. For a world in which blackness is elective or incidental, a world where you can happen to be black is a world without blackness. A world that is where the concept has been dismantled or transfigured beyond recognition. Now, if you are someone who lives in North America and you see how blackness is imposed on us, it becomes our reality. If you go out, you are black. For example, when the African teams going to the World Cup, when they went to the US, and the way they were dressed, very amazing, cultural attire that was supposed to represent their countries. Now, many African Americans and many Africans who were making commentaries on their clothing, you know what they were saying? They were saying, that's black culture. Why? The moment you come to North America, you're black. It doesn't really matter. But these people are African. They didn't say this is an African culture. They say this is a black culture. Because North Americans, they see Africans, they see the world through the prisms of their own realities. Their cultures have been taken away. The connection with Africa has been 200, 300, 400 years removed from Africa. So the idea that they are black is something that has been internalized. Some of them resist being called African American, and I'll make another video on that. So they call them, that's black culture. It's an African culture, but that's what they're supposed to say. It's not the individual fault. There's a cultural edifice that forces that on people. Like when you come here and you're Ghanaian, you're Somali, you're just black. Sudanese who don't call themselves black in Africa, they're black here. That's a reality. You have no choice. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a very well-known writer, is an award-winning writer. In his book, The Message, a collection of essays, that one essay he writes about going to Gaza, the other one going to South Carolina, the other one going to Ghana, he went to Senegal. And when he goes to Africa, instead of seeing himself as an African in Africa, he saw Africans as black in Africa. So Africans are always seen through the prisms of others. The same thing in the 1950s when the renowned African-American writer, Richard Wright, he writes that in Black Power. So he went to the Gold Coast. It wasn't Ghana at the time. So Nkrumah was agitating for independence. So some of his friends in France, he was in France at the time, they said, go to Ghana and see what is happening. He was impressed, but still he saw Africans through a Western eye. He was a Westerner. Sometimes it does make fun of Africans if you read the book Black Power. And one of the things he did, he still saw Africans through his American eyes. They were black. And instead of becoming African in Africa, he turned Africans into black. So it's not the individual fault. They have to play the role that their culture, the epistemic tradition or epistemological tradition has imposed on them. So whether it's Coates in Ghana or in Senegal, or it was Richard Wright in the 1950s in Gold Coast, now Ghana, it's the same. It's the same with us now in North America. We have to play that role. Now, here's my problem with this. If blackness has to be dismantled, if it has to be transfigured beyond recognition, who is supposed to do that? It's not the Chinese. It's not the European. It's not the European American. It is us. It's the diaspora African. It is the continental African. We are the ones to say, I am Sudanese. I am Ghanaian. I'm Togolese. I'm Namibian. I'm Swati. And I'm African. And I'm Igbo. I'm Nuer. I'm Jing. I'm Tigrinya. So when I come here, I'm an African, and that's my identity. This thing you call black is not something my ancestors used, so do not use it on us. We are the ones to say that. But if we say, well, the only way you can say I'm not black is if blackness does not exist. But blackness will not magically disappear. In the 1960s, when Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, he's the one who came up with the idea of black power. He's the one who valorized and went to university campuses and talked about black power. So the black power movement came through him, and it was taken up by musicians, by artists, and everyone else. He didn't wait for someone to say, let us wait for European Americans. Let us ask them. Let us say, okay, we want to be called black. We don't want to be called Negroes. And if they say yes, then we'll now call ourselves black. He didn't do that. He didn't wait. He centered himself. He said, this is what we have to do. If Negro was to disappear beyond recognition, to be dismantled and transfigured, he didn't wait. But somehow we think today, to say we don't need black, we need to look for the dominant group. It's not going to disappear. So this is what I called abdication of epistemic and epistemological responsibility, because someone like Gates is a renowned scholar, a scholar of international repute, but he somehow thinks someone else will do it. That's what many scholars do. Someone else will do. They talk about decolonization, but they put exceptions when it comes to black. Now, let me go to Bois. I talk a lot. That's the problem with us teachers. So, this is what he said to Barton. No name ever was historically accurate. Neither English, French, German, white, Jew, Nordic, nor Anglo-Saxon. They were all at first nicknames, misnomers, accidents, grown eventually to conventional habits and achieving accuracy simply because wide and continued usage rendered them accurate. In this sense, Negro is quite as accurate, quite as old, and quite as definite as any name of any great group of people. So it's basically saying it is not just Negro. Let us use it, let people use it, and over time it will become accurate like English or white. It's also saying it's old. It's not old. The first people to use it were the Portuguese. Although the term Negro, which means black, by the way, is Spanish. It's not actually Portuguese. It's Spanish, but it's used by Portuguese because they were the first people to explore the seas. Portuguese started, followed by the Spanish, and then the rest of Europe. So it's not old. But when Africans interacted with Europeans, They were called different names. They were called Moors, called different names. But Negro came with the Portuguese and then the Spanish. So it's not as old. It was maybe by the time it was writing, it was maybe 300, 200 years old, 300 years old. But there are some things with which we can disagree and agree with him, right? So the names can be accurate. But what I don't accept here is that it becomes accurate. It doesn't become accurate. The inaccuracy become irrelevant over time. And also you get used to it. You don't even question it because after 200 years, you don't even know the origin of the name. So you don't even rack your mind to say, okay, what is the meaning of French? What is the meaning of Jew? Over time, it becomes common sense. You don't question it. Not because it has become accurate, but the accuracy over time become irrelevant. Let me give you an example. In System of Logic by John Stuart Mill, there's a story he gives. And the first time I saw that story was in Saul Kripke's book, Naming a Necessity. So one of the things he said is about River Dat and the town called Dartmouth. Dartmouth, but it's just called Dartmouth. So it's called Dartmouth because the town was located at the mouth of River Dat. So the name itself captures the location of the town. So when people say Dartmouth, it means a town that is located at the mouth of Dart. But then I think environment and environmental issues change the course of the river. So, and the town of Dart is no longer at the mouth of Dart. But people didn't say, well, we cannot call our town Dartmouth when it's not at the mouth of the Dart. Let us change it. They didn't say that. The name remained. It's called Dartmouth. No one actually questioned the name, but it is not at the mouth of the Dart. It's inaccurate. Geographically speaking, it's not accurate. So what he says here somehow makes sense, but it's not the inaccuracy that becomes accurate. The inaccuracy becomes common sense and people don't question it anymore. If you were to look for the etymology of the term, you will still find the inaccuracy. You're not going to say, okay, it has completely been used, so if you look for the etymology of the term, you will not find the inaccuracy. You will still find the inaccuracy, but it has become relevant over time. So the Dartmouth is still used by people because the meaning is irrelevant. The meaning of the term over time becomes irrelevant. But at the time he was writing, at the time Barton was writing, the history of the term was really recent and the inaccuracy was relevant to the discourse at the time. And then he almost makes fun of the young man. He says, suppose now we change the name. Suppose we arose tomorrow morning and lo, instead of being called Negroes, all the world call us Cheeriopalidi. Do you really think this would make a vast and momentous difference to you and me? Would the Negro problem be suddenly and eternally settled? Would you be any less ashamed of being descended from a black man, or would your schoolmates feel any less superior to you? The feeling of inferiority is in you, not in the name. The name merely invokes what is already there. Exercise the hateful complex, and no name can ever make you hang your head. Now, a number of things. Some of the things he has assumed here are things he embedded in what Barton said. Barton didn't say that. Barton wasn't ashamed of his people. He was actually proud of them. That's why he didn't want Africans to be called Negroes. He wasn't ashamed of being a descendant of Africans. He was actually proud. That's why he said use African, not Negro. He was also not saying, if we change the name, then we'll change our living condition. He wasn't saying that. He wasn't saying, let us change the name to something else, to American, and all of a sudden racial prejudice will go away. He wasn't saying that. That's not what he's saying. He wasn't also saying that if you call us Negro, we feel ashamed, we feel inferior. That's not what he's saying. He's saying the name was invented to make us feel inferior. He wasn't saying the name makes me feel inferior. So he wasn't feeling inferior. He was proud of himself. That's why he was rejecting things he believed should not apply to him. So in the chapter, I engage more with him and with others like Carter G. Woodson, because Carter G. Woodson was also critical of those who said the name Negro should be changed. So if you read the chapter, you will see more of this. So let me end by emphasizing this. This is one of the things I talk about in the book, Blackness as a Human Identity. For many scholars, Blackness or Black identity is something that is imposed on us. Although today it's not imposed through violence, it is imposed through epistemologists, through epistemes, through what Antonio Gramsci would call hegemony through consent. where you are controlled with your own consent. You're not basically asked to say, can we control you? And then you say yes, no. You're controlled through schools, through churches, through other institutions, through the media. So you believe what you're not supposed to believe, but you believe it anyway because of the institutions within which you live and work. So many scholars, all scholars believe it was imposed identity, although they have made peace with it. So one of the things it has done, Blackness has supplanted, has replaced culture-based and place-based identities and also values-based identities, because Black is color-based. It's not values-based, not place-based. It's not culture-based, based on appearance. So that's what it has done. Now, there's something which I engage with, which I don't dismiss. Many scholars and activists use it because they feel it is used for solidarity. When we come here as Africans, as Jamaicans, as, I don't know, Brazilians, Afro-Brazilians, as Ethiopians, we all become Black. And that creates a sort of community. When something happens to the Ethiopians, it makes us feel a certain way. And it collectivizes us. So it builds a sort of solidarity. That's why the Black Lives Matter, when it was formed, it also campaigned for the release of the Nigerian girls who were abducted by Boko Haram. So if they're shooting in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, it makes some people in, I don't know, in Toronto or in London who are Africans feel a certain way. So they say it creates solidarity because we're still living as marginalized people and we need that. So it's used for resistance against racism, against, for example, African-American scholars would write about debt relief in Africa, because Africa is burdened by Western debt, because they see those people as Black people, their own people. Other people were saying also, even if Blackness was used in the past as a denigrating term, we've reclaimed it. So in the 1960s, when Kwame Ture talked about Black power and people talk about Black pride and Black beauty and things like that, they said we've changed the name. It's no longer the negative terminology. We've reclaimed it. We've made it positive. So now we've reclaimed the term, which I have a problem with, because if you're someone who's self-centered and you want to go back to your people, to your ancestors, the place of your indigeneity, why do you settle for an identity that was used to denigrate you? Why reclaim it in the first place? It is not on your skin. It's not something people see on your skin. It's not something your ancestors would actually use. They wouldn't use identities. They wouldn't call themselves by colors as if they are cattle. So why use it in the first place? And that's which one of the things I struggle with. They say reclaiming the name. You cannot reclaim an insult. You can't. But we have done that. The only way you can reclaim it is if you're reclaiming your skin. But Blackness is not the skin. That's where I discuss, there's a chapter where I talk about decoupling this Blackness from the skin. Because Blackness isn't your skin. It is something that other people think they see. And if you look at people, you don't really see Blackness on the skin. Even if you see Blackness on the skin, you shouldn't create identities using what you see. One of the things Europeans did when they went to Africa, when they encountered Africa, they did ask the names. But instead of using the names of the people, they say, I don't really care. I'll call you what I want to call you anyway. You look Black, so I'm going to use that. Convenient for me. But then that kind of thinking is what people are saying, okay, we'll still use the names that came to us through those kind of ideas. It is sad. The other problem also, they said Africans cannot think for themselves, that Africans are like infants, like children. And then we still use the names they created and we valorize them, we moralize them, we standardize them. It inadvertently somehow reinforces what they used to say. These people cannot think for themselves. They're trying to make sense of what we gave them as an insult, and they're now making it positive. Why? For diaspora Africans, I understand because of the history of slavery. They can say we are not Africans. But continental Africans, what is the point? You come from Nigeria, you come from Africa, you come from Igbo, but you still think somehow you have to valorize Black. But then again, for diaspora Africans who say they're not Africans and they're Black, why do they call you Black? Do they call you Black because you came from, your ancestors came from New Zealand or Australia, because they also call them Black, or Solomon Island? No, they call you Black because you have some historical connection with Africa. So your Blackness is not the Blackness in Australia, it's a Blackness in Africa. So it's a contradiction to say, I am a Black American, but I'm not an African American. But then at the same time, you'll say, okay, this guy's a Black guy, I'm a Black guy. It's a contradiction. But I'll make another video about that. So the continued usage of Blackness, for me, as a social utility, is an abdication of what I said earlier. epistemic and epistemological responsibility. We have relative epistemic power to be able to correct this. So that's why we call for epistemic self-centering, actual decolonization. Self-centering is really crucial. See, in South Africa, the descendants of the Dutch in South Africa, they went to Africa, and you know what they called themselves? Afrikaan. And they forced the indigenous Africans to call them Afrikaans. But the indigenous Africans were called black. And instead of saying we are the indigenous, we will decide what we are called in our land, they say, yes, sir, we are black people. We're colored. This is what it's called. That's self-centering. So one of the things I don't understand, instead of calling themselves black, why didn't they look for a collective name within African languages? Something that is not related to, or they just call themselves Africans. But no, we have to do what Europeans tell us to do. We call ourselves black. I don't understand. Even when Great Biko talks about black consciousness, which has a history in the US Black Power movement, black consciousness, why not African consciousness? You allowed a colonist to come and take your name and become the African, and you are black. Yes, there's a white, but the white, they also dictated on you. They call themselves white because they are the one who decided. Whiteness has something to do with purity and things like that. And it's a recent one. So self-centering. Even people who talk about decolonization, epistemic freedom, you look at scholars, you look at books that are written, they talk about decolonization, epistemic freedom, but then they think within the colonial mindset. And then these two quotes actually remind me of the danger of this. When the colonial mindset is in your head, they can control you. You can say exactly what they want. So Biko said in a collection of essays called I Write What I Like. So if you haven't read it, try to read it. The most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressed is the mind of it should be the most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So this should be oppressor. So the oppressor targets your mind. The moment they control your mind, they don't have to worry about anything. And then Carter G. Woodson, he was a prominent African-American historian. He's actually the one who started what we now call Black History Month. He began it as Negro History Week. And then I think in the 1970s, it was changed into Black History Month by Gerald Ford, who was the president at the time. It became Black History Month. It was Negro History Week. You can see in the 1950s, 60s, and it was Negro this, Negro that, Negro Africa. Now it's Black Africa. Now it's Black American. There used to be African Negroes, American Negroes, or I don't know, things like that. So he said, if you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. So they threw out some names like you are Negroes, you are colored, you're people of color, you're black, and then we grapple with all those names. We grapple with those names and they are sitting back. So I'm going to make more videos on these topics. There's a lot in the book that I engage with. One of the things about scholarly writings is this. Even if you disagree with a scholar, you have to engage with them. You have to show you understand what they're saying. You can actually show that you understand what they're saying. It's not just to say, I understand. You have to show that you understand through what you write, so that when someone else reads what you've written about their work, you actually understand. And then now you go and say, okay, this is where I don't agree with them. So I do engage with Du Bois, with G. Woodson, the contradictions in their works, and everything else. So if you haven't, and if you're interested, you can order the book. It's a scholarly book, so it's pricey. It's hardcover, but I think the paperback is coming soon. But the ebook is there. It's about $50. So you can order it to support my work. The other things are the poetry books. The Caucasus Valley, that's my first collection of poems. And then there's Exegesis of Despotism. And then there's Twilight Martyrs. So they are all on Amazon. The other one is something you can order for your kids. And I really urge you to order this for your kids. It's about fighting tribalism in South Sudan. It's about friends, 4 friends who they've played together. And there's Ochang, Aluel, Nyakong, Nyoka, and Lado. So it's on Amazon. Order it for your kids. I'm going to write a second one. It's based on mythology from where I come from, but I was planning to write a mythology based on others, for example, Shilluk or Nuer mythology, and write another book for children. So thank you. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel. This is where I will be posting my scholarly works. Thank you.